The Steffi Graf Stadium in Berlin. June 17, 2026. The air is electric. The grass is pristine. And the tennis world is about to witness something that no one saw coming. On one side of the net stands Elena Rybakina, the world number 2. The Wimbledon champion. The player who has dominated the tour with a game built on power, precision, and ice-cold composure. A player who just weeks ago dismantled Alexandra Eala in straight sets at the Italian Open, sending a clear message to the young Filipina that she was not ready for the big stage. On the other side stands Alexandra Eala, the 21-year-old sensation from the Philippines. The wild card. The underdog. The player who was told she didn't belong, who was overlooked, who was fined, who was doubted at every single turn. A player who had just survived a brutal 3-set battle with Donna Vekić, the Olympic silver medalist who had been called Tita Donna by the Filipino fans, just to reach this moment. The world expected a repeat of Rome. A routine victory for the world number 2. Another lesson for the young Filipina. Another reminder that there are levels to this game, and that Eala, for all her promise, was not yet ready to compete with the elite. But the tennis world was wrong. Dead wrong. What happened on that court in Berlin was not a routine victory. It was a statement. It was a demolition. It was a moment that would send shockwaves through the sport and leave the tennis establishment scrambling for answers. But there was something else. Something that made this moment even more surreal. A figure in the stands. A man whose presence was so unexpected, so out of place, that the cameras couldn't stop showing him. A man worth billions. A man who had no apparent connection to tennis, Bill Gates, the Microsoft co-founder. The philanthropist. The man who had played charity matches alongside Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. He was sitting in the stands, watching a young Filipina player take on the world number 2. Why was he there? What had drawn him to Berlin? And why was he so captivated by the young woman on the court? The questions swirled. The conspiracy theories began. But one thing was certain. The tennis world was stunned, not just by Eala's performance, but by the presence of a man who had no business being there. This is the story of that match. This is the story of how a young woman defied every expectation, silenced every critic, and announced to the world that she was no longer just a promising prospect. She was a contender. And she had captured the attention of one of the most powerful men on the planet. Let's begin. The path to greatness is never easy. And for Alexandra Eala, the road to Elena Rybakina began with a familiar face. Donna Vekić had arrived in Berlin with a target on her back. The Croatian veteran had just won the biggest title of her career at Queen's Club, defeating former US Open champion Emma Raducanu in the final. Her victory had catapulted her 43 spots up the rankings, from number 76 to number 33, making her one of the most dangerous players in the draw. The momentum was with Vekić. The confidence was with Vekić. And the world was watching to see if the 29-year-old could continue her remarkable run, but there was something else at play. Something that made this match unlike any other. Just weeks earlier, the Filipino fans had embraced Vekić with open arms. They had called her Tita Donna. They had made her an adopted daughter of the Philippines. She had even traveled to Manila to compete in the Philippine Women's Open, experiencing firsthand the overwhelming support that Alexandra Eala enjoys wherever she plays. Now, Vekić was standing on the other side of the net. The friendship, the admiration, the connection, none of it mattered once the first ball was struck. This was war. The match was played on the pristine grass of the Steffi Graf Stadium in Berlin. Eala, ranked 35th in the world after slipping from 33rd due to Vekic's leap in the rankings, needed this victory desperately. A win would not only avenge her Queen's Club disappointment, where she had fallen to Eva Jovic in the round of 16, but it would also keep her Wimbledon seeding hopes alive. A loss would end her Berlin campaign before it truly began. The tension was unbearable. Vekić, riding the high of her Queen's Club triumph, was a wall from the baseline. Her serves were precise. Her ground strokes were heavy. She played like a woman possessed, determined to prove that her recent success was no fluke. But Eala had something that Vekić could not match. Experience. Not in terms of years on the tour, but in terms of big moments. Eala had already beaten Vekić twice before. Once at the ASB Classic in Auckland, where she clawed back from a set down to win 4-6, 6-4, 6-4. And once at the Kuyong Classic, a much more straightforward 6-3, 6-4 victory in an exhibition match. She knew Vekic's game. She knew Vekic's tendencies. And she knew that the Croatian, for all her talent, was vulnerable when the pressure mounted. The match was a marathon. Eala and Vekić traded breaks, each refusing to give an inch. The crowd, packed with Filipino flags and Tita Donna signs, was torn. They loved both players. They wanted both to win. But when the final point was played, there could only be one victor. Eala emerged triumphant. The scoreline reflected the battle that had taken place. It was a victory that showed the tennis world what Eala had known all along. She belonged on the biggest stages. She could beat anyone on any given day. And she had just earned the right to face the second best player in the world. Elena Rybakina was waiting. The world number 2 had been watching from the sidelines, her eyes fixed on the young Filipina, who had just survived a 3-set war. She had seen this before. She had beaten Eala before. And she was confident that she would do it again. Their first meeting had been at the Italian Open in Rome. May 2026. A round of 32 clash that had ended in a straight sets victory for Rybakina, 6-4, 6-3. It had been a routine win for the Kazakh, a reminder to the young Filipina that there were levels to this game. Eala had fought hard, but Rybakina's power and experience had been too much. The match had ended with a handshake at the net, a polite nod, and the unspoken understanding that Eala still had a long way to go. But that was Rome. This was Berlin. And Eala was no longer the same player. The weeks between Rome and Berlin had been transformative. Eala had won her second WTA 125 title at Birmingham, proving that her breakthrough at Miami was no fluke. She had reached the round of 16 at Queen's Club, falling only to a player in red-hot form. She had climbed to a career-high ranking of 33, a number that placed her firmly among the world's best. And she had developed a belief in herself that was unshakable. Rybakina, meanwhile, had not been at her best. She had reached the quarterfinals at Queen's Club, where she had fallen to Katie Boulter in 3 sets. The loss had exposed vulnerabilities in her game. Her serve, usually a weapon, had been inconsistent. Her movement, usually fluid, had been sluggish. She had looked vulnerable. The tennis world expected Rybakina to bounce back in Berlin. They expected her to use her frustration from Queen's Club as fuel, to take it out on the young Filipina, who had somehow managed to win her first round match. The narrative was simple. The world number 2 would teach the upstart a lesson. But Eala had other plans. The match began with a roar from the crowd. The Steffi Graf Stadium, usually a neutral venue, had transformed into a sea of Filipino flags. The support for Eala was deafening. It was the kind of atmosphere that rattles opponents, that makes them question their own abilities, that forces them to confront the reality that they are no longer playing against just one player, but against an entire nation. Rybakina, to her credit, did not crumble under the noise. She had played in front of hostile crowds before. She had won Grand Slams. She had beaten the best players in the world. She was not going to be intimidated by a few flags and some loud cheers, but Eala was different. She thrived in this environment. The more the crowd cheered, the more she believed. The more the noise swelled, the more she pushed. She was playing with a freedom that had been absent in Rome. She was playing with a confidence that had been forged through months of victories, through beating Grand Slam champions, through proving to the world that she belonged. The first set was a battle. Rybakina's power was on full display. Her serve was thundering. Her ground strokes were devastating. She pushed Eala to the limit, forcing her to defend, forcing her to scramble, forcing her to prove that she could handle the pace, and Eala did. She absorbed Rybakina's power and returned it with interest. Her forehand was precise. Her backhand was a weapon. Her movement on the grass was fluid and composed. She was not just surviving against the world number 2. She was thriving. The second set saw a shift in momentum. Eala, sensing that Rybakina was vulnerable, stepped up her aggression. She started dictating points. She started moving forward, taking the ball early, putting pressure on the Wimbledon champion. Rybakina, unaccustomed to being outplayed, started making errors. Her forehand, normally a weapon, betrayed her. Her serve, normally a reliable source of free points, deserted her. The final point was a microcosm of the entire match. A long rally. A desperate stretch. A forehand that screamed past the world number 2. And then silence. The Steffi Graf Stadium, which had been roaring just moments earlier, held its breath. And then erupted. Alexandra Eala had done the unthinkable. She had stunned Elena Rybakina. The world number 2. The Wimbledon champion. The player who had beaten her so easily just weeks earlier in Rome. The tennis world was in disbelief, but there was something else. Something that made this moment even more surreal. A figure in the stands. A man whose presence was so unexpected, so out of place, that the cameras couldn't stop showing him. A man worth billions. A man who had no apparent connection to tennis, Bill Gates, the Microsoft co-founder. The philanthropist. The man who had played charity matches alongside Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. He was sitting in the stands, watching a young Filipina player take on the world number 2. Why was he there? What had drawn him to Berlin? And why was he so captivated by the young woman on the court? For decades, Gates has been a passionate tennis fan. Growing up in a middle-class household in Seattle, Gates developed a love for the racket sport during his childhood. He was an avid player throughout high school and during his short-lived spell at Harvard University. In his own words, tennis is the number one thing he does for fun, but Gates' tennis journey took a remarkable turn in 2017 when Roger Federer invited him to be his partner in a charity celebrity doubles match. The event, Match for Africa, raised over $2 million for the Roger Federer Foundation. Gates described the moment as a dream come true. Federer was so impressed with Gates' skills that he invited him back for the following 2 events. When Gates appeared in Berlin, the tennis world took notice. Why was one of the richest men on the planet sitting in the stands at a WTA 500 event? Some speculated that he was there to scout talent for a potential investment. Others whispered that he was supporting the Rafa Nadal Academy, of which Eala is a graduate. Still others believed he simply wanted to watch the best tennis players in the world. But the cameras kept returning to him. And the commentators couldn't stop talking about him. The presence of Bill Gates had turned an already extraordinary match into a global spectacle. It was a moment that transcended tennis. It was a moment of pure, surreal drama, and Eala, who may or may not have known that Gates was watching, played like a woman inspired. The victory over Elena Rybakina was not just a win. It was a statement. It was a declaration that Alexandra Eala was ready for the biggest stage of them all. The implications of the victory were clear. Eala had not only beaten a top 10 player, she had beaten a player who was ranked number 2 in the world. She had beaten a player who had won Wimbledon. She had beaten a player who had dismantled her just weeks earlier in Rome. The win added significant ranking points to Eala's total. Combined with her Birmingham Open victory and her consistent performances on the WTA Tour, she was now poised to break into the top 30, a feat that no Filipino player had ever achieved. The victory also improved Eala's seeding prospects for Wimbledon. The seeding cutoff was June 22, and her performance in Berlin had given her a crucial boost. A seed at Wimbledon would give Eala a protected placement in the draw, avoiding the top seeds until at least the third round. It would be a transformative moment in her career, but the victory was about more than rankings and seeds. It was about belief. It was about validation. It was about showing the world that Alexandra Eala was not a flash in the pan. She was a star. And she was only getting started. The presence of Bill Gates in the stands added another layer of significance to the moment. The world was watching. The powerful were taking notice. And Eala had proven that she belonged on the biggest stage, not just as a competitor, but as a global phenomenon. The road ahead was not easy. The grass season was in full swing, and the competition was only getting tougher. But Eala had proven that she could handle the pressure. She had proven that she could beat the best players in the world. And she had proven that she belonged among the elite. For the Philippines, the victory was a moment of national pride. A young girl from Quezon City had beaten the Wimbledon champion. She had made history. And she had inspired millions. For Eala, the victory was a step towards a much bigger goal. She wanted to win Grand Slams. She wanted to be the best player in the world. And she was willing to work for it, to sacrifice for it, to fight for it. The victory over Elena Rybakina at the Berlin Open was a milestone. A moment that would be remembered for years to come. A moment that announced to the world that Alexandra Eala was here, she was ready, and she was not going anywhere, and who knows? Maybe Bill Gates will be watching when she takes the court at Wimbledon. Eala K&PE line at Kana High etc. And that, my friends, is how a 21-year-old from Quezon City walked onto the grass of Berlin and stunned the Wimbledon champion. Elena Rybakina. The world number 2. A player who had beaten her just weeks earlier. But this time, it was different. This time, Alexandra Eala refused to lose. This time, she played with the heart of a champion. And the tennis world was left in absolute disbelief. Bill Gates was there to witness it. The cameras were rolling. The history was being written. This is the rise of Alexandra Eala. This is history in the making. And trust me, this is only the beginning.